They called it the Bearing of Truth, an ancient werewolf ritual where the Alpha King's bride must disrobe before the entire pack to prove her worthiness. Selina agreed to the arranged marriage to end a 60-year war. She agreed to leave her home and bind herself to a cold, ancient ruler she'd met only once. She even agreed to stand half-naked before 1,000 judging eyes. What she didn't agree to is being exposed as the one thing pack law demands be killed on sight, a half-blood. Half-werewolf, half-witch, marked with a silver crescent that glows under the full moon, a mark she's hidden her entire life with magic and careful lies. Now the glamour has shattered. The mark blazes on her skin for all to see. And Alpha King Gomez, the immortal ruler who should be the first to call for her execution, has done the unthinkable. He's declared her under his protection. To save her, he must face trial by combat against the Council's champion. His own estranged son, who's waited centuries for a chance to claim the throne. If Gomez wins, Selina lives but loses everything. She can never be Luna, can never stand beside him as an equal. If he loses, they both die. But there's a third option nobody's considering. What if the half-blood they're so desperate to kill is exactly what their dying kingdom needs? What if the mark they call corruption is actually power? And what if the Cold King's first act of mercy in 200 years isn't weakness, but the beginning of a revolution? One ritual, one exposed secret, one impossible choice, and a love that could either unite the werewolf world or burn it to the ground. Selina stood at the edge of the grand ceremonial hall, her hands trembling as the elder explained the final wedding ritual, the one no one had warned her about. You will disrobe to the waist before Alpha King Gomez and the entire northern pack, Elder Mara said without emotion, her ancient face carved from stone and centuries of tradition. This is tradition. This is law. This is how we know you are worthy to be Luna. The words hit Selina like a physical blow. She felt the blood drain from her face, felt her knees threaten to buckle beneath the weight of ceremonial robes that suddenly felt like a shroud rather than a celebration. I'm sorry, Selina managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't understand. No one mentioned. It is not mentioned until the day arrives, Elder Mara interrupted, her tone suggesting this conversation had happened 1,000 times before with 1,000 other brides. To speak of it beforehand would give the unworthy time to flee. The bearing of truth has been our way since the first Alpha Kings walked these mountains. It separates the pure from the corrupted, the brave from the cowardly. Behind Elder Mara, 3 handmaidens stood in perfect formation, their expressions serene. This was normal to them. Expected. Sacred, even. How long do I have? Selina asked, hating how her voice shook. The ceremony begins at moonrise. 6 hours. Elder Mara's gray eyes swept over Selina with clinical assessment. The handmaidens will prepare you. Bathe you in the sacred herbs. Braid your hair with silver thread. You will be beautiful when you stand before your Alpha King. Beautiful. Exposed. Condemned. The elder turned to leave, her dark robes sweeping across the marble floor like a raven's wing. At the doorway, she paused without looking back. Many brides fear this moment, child. But fear is temporary. Shame lasts forever. Remember that when you stand before him. The door closed with a sound like a tomb sealing shut. Selina remained frozen for a long moment, her mind racing through impossible calculations. Could she run? Where would she go? Her younger brother Micah was still being held in her father's territory, insurance for this alliance, though no one had been crude enough to call it a hostage situation. If she fled, Micah would pay the price. Could she refuse? Tell them she wouldn't participate in this archaic humiliation? She almost laughed at the thought. She'd had no choice in any of this from the moment her father had summoned her to his study 3 months ago. The memory surfaced unbidden. Alpha Cyrus of the Eastern Pack, her father, sitting behind his massive oak desk with maps of contested territories spread before him like battle plans. Because that's what they were. The Northern and Eastern territories have been at war for 60 years, he'd said without preamble. 3 generations of our people dying over boundary lines that shift with every season. Alpha King Gomez has proposed an end to it. Selina had felt hope bloom in her chest. Peace. Finally. He wants a blood bond, her father had continued. A marriage between our families. You and him. The hope had died as quickly as it had sparked to life. Me? She'd whispered. But I'm not trained for this. I'm not a diplomat or a warrior. You're my only daughter. You're young enough to bear him heirs. And you're expendable enough that if the alliance fails, I haven't lost anything I can't afford. The words had been delivered without cruelty, just cold political calculation. That had somehow made them worse. She'd met Gomez exactly once before agreeing to the marriage. A formal introduction in neutral territory, surrounded by guards from both packs, tensions so thick it had been hard to breathe. Alpha King Gomez was not what she'd expected. She'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. The Alpha who'd ruled the Northern Territory for 2 centuries. Who'd expanded his borders through a combination of strategic brilliance and ruthless force. Who showed no mercy to traitors and no weakness to enemies. The Cold King, some called him. The Immortal Alpha. But the man who'd stood before her that day had been something else entirely. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair shot through with silver at the temples. A face that might have been handsome if it hadn't been so carefully controlled, so devoid of anything soft. And his eyes, golden, intense, ancient. Eyes that had seen empires rise and fall, that held the weight of centuries. When those eyes had fixed on her, Selina had felt exposed in a way she'd never experienced before. As if he could see straight through her, past her polite smile and careful composure, down to the terrified girl beneath who knew she was walking into a trap with no way out. "You're younger than I expected," he'd said. His voice was deep, controlled, with an accent that spoke of old bloodlines and older power. "I'm 23, she'd replied, lifting her chin. Old enough. Something had flickered in his expression then. Not quite amusement, but close to it. Old enough for what, exactly? To know when I'm being used as a bargaining chip. To understand that peace is worth personal sacrifice. To do what needs to be done." He'd studied her for a long moment, and Selina had forced herself not to look away, not to show the fear that was clawing at her throat. "You're afraid of me," he'd observed. Not a question. Yes. Good. Fear keeps people honest. He'd turned to leave then, the meeting apparently concluded. But at the door, he'd glance back. "I'm told you read. That you prefer books to pack politics." She'd nodded, surprised he knew even that small detail about her. "There's a library in the Northern Hall. 12,000 volumes, some of them very old. You'll have access to it." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to her in the entire negotiation process. A small offering, a glimpse of something beyond the cold political arrangement. Then he'd left, and Selina had been left wondering if the Alpha King was as heartless as the rumors claimed, or if there was something more buried beneath centuries of careful control. Now, alone in her chambers with 6 hours until she had to bear herself before him and his entire pack, Selina moved to the full-length mirror in the corner of the room. Her hands shook as she unlaced the front of her dress, letting the fabric fall away from her shoulders. She wore a simple chemise beneath, and through the thin cotton, she could see the shadow of what she'd been hiding her entire life. With careful, practiced movements, Selina pulled the chemise up, exposing her left side. There, just below her ribcage, was the mark. A silver crescent moon, about the size of her palm, that seemed to shimmer in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Even now, hours before moonrise, it pulsed with faint luminescence. By the time the full moon reached its zenith tonight, it would glow bright enough to cast shadows. This was her curse. Her secret. The thing that would condemn her to death if anyone discovered it. The mark of a half-blood. Her mother had been a witch. Not some hedge magic practitioner or herbalist, a true witch with power that ran in bloodlines older than the werewolf packs themselves. When Alpha Cyrus had taken her as a mate, it had been scandalous, but not explicitly forbidden. Werewolves and witches had a complicated history, full of alliances and betrayals that shifted like sand. But then Selina had been born with the mark. A child who carried both wolf and witch blood in her veins. An abomination, according to pack law. A corruption of the pure bloodlines. Her mother had used every spell she knew to hide it. Glamours and charms, woven so tightly around Selina that even her father hadn't known what his daughter truly was. When her mother had died 8 years ago, some said from illness, but Selina suspected the constant magical drain of maintaining those protective spells. Selina had been old enough to maintain the glamour herself. For 8 years, she'd lived in constant fear of discovery. She'd learned to dress carefully, to avoid situations where she might be seen undressed. She'd memorized her mother's spells, practicing them until they were as natural as breathing. But glamour magic required concentration. It required power. And it couldn't withstand everything. A ritual where she was required to stand half-naked before the full moon and an entire pack of werewolves? That would shatter any glamour she could create. Selina stared at her reflection, at the mark that pulsed with her heartbeat, and felt despair settle over her like a heavy cloak. She was going to die tonight. Oh, they might not kill her immediately. There would be a trial, probably. Some form of judgment where the Council of Elders would debate exactly how to execute a half-blood who dared to try to become Luna. But the end result was certain. Pack law was clear. Half-bloods were to be killed on sight. No exceptions. No mercy. A knock at the door made her jump. She quickly pulled her chemise and dress back into place, her heart hammering. Yes! The handmaidens entered, carrying baskets of herbs and ceremonial oils. They moved with practiced efficiency, chattering quietly among themselves about the evening's preparations. The purification bath must be drawn just so, one of them said. Equal parts wolfsbane and moonflower, steeped in spring water blessed by the eldest. And her hair must be braided before sunset, another added. The silver threads catch the moonlight during the ceremony. It's quite beautiful, really. They spoke about her as if she weren't there. Or perhaps as if she were already an object rather than a person, the Luna-to-be, a role rather than a woman. The youngest handmaiden, a girl who couldn't be more than 18, finally met Selina's eyes. There was something almost apologetic in her expression. "It's not so terrible," she said softly. "The exposure, I mean. It's over quickly. And Alpha King Gomez is not cruel about it. He performs the ritual with dignity. Small comfort." Selina nodded mutely. "Come," the eldest handmaiden said, gesturing toward the bathing chamber. "We must begin preparations. The moon waits for no one." Selina followed them, her mind racing. She had 6 hours. 6 hours to decide if she would go through with this suicide mission or find some other way out. But what other way was there? She thought of Micah, her bright, kind younger brother who'd hugged her fiercely when she'd left the Eastern Pack. Who'd whispered, "You don't have to do this," even though they both knew she did. She thought of the thousands of wolves on both sides of the territory lines who would die if this alliance failed, who would continue dying in pointless skirmishes over land and pride. She thought of Alpha King Gomez and his golden eyes, and the library he'd promised her access to, and wondered what he would look like when he realized his Luna was the very thing his laws demanded he destroy. The handmaidens began filling the large stone bath with steaming water, adding handfuls of dried herbs that released a sharp, medicinal scent. Wolfsbane to purify, moonflower to illuminate. Ancient ingredients for an ancient ritual. Selina looked down at her hands and saw they were still trembling. 6 hours until moonrise. 6 hours until everything she'd hidden, everything she'd protected, everything she was, would be laid bare before a pack that would call for her blood. And somewhere in the northern hall, Alpha King Gomez was preparing for a wedding that would either unite two territories in peace or tear them both apart in ways no one could have anticipated. The moon was rising early on the horizon, a pale ghost in the afternoon sky. By nightfall, it would be full and bright and merciless. Selina stepped toward the bath, toward the ritual that would expose her, toward a fate she couldn't escape. But as she moved, something fierce flickered to life in her chest. Not acceptance. Not resignation. Defiance. If she was going to die tonight, she would die on her own terms. She would stand before them marked and proud. She would make them look at what they feared and force them to see that she was more than their prejudice, more than their ancient laws. She was Selina of the Eastern Pack, daughter of a witch and a wolf. Halfblood. Abomination. And for 6 more hours, she was still alive. That would have to be enough. The ceremonial bath was supposed to purify her. Instead, Selina sat in water infused with wolfsbane and moonflower, watching her secret mark pulse with silver light beneath the surface, knowing that in 6 hours, everyone would see what she'd spent her entire life hiding. The handmaidens scrubbed her skin with sacred herbs, their hands efficient and impersonal. They braided her hair with silver threads that caught the fading sunlight, weaving patterns that were supposed to honor the moon goddess. Selina wondered if the moon goddess would laugh or weep when the truth came out. "You're fortunate," the eldest handmaiden said, working scented oil into Selina's shoulders. "Alpha King Gomez is fair in the ritual. Some alphas make it unnecessarily difficult." Selina didn't ask what that meant. She didn't want to know. The youngest handmaiden, Maya, leaned close as she rinsed Selina's hair. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "The ritual reveals wolves from pretenders. If you're not pure wolf, the Alpha King will know." Selina's heart stopped. "What do you mean?" Maya's eyes held a warning. "The moonlight shows what glamour hides. Any mark, any curse, any corruption, it all becomes visible under the full moon's gaze during the bearing." Of course it did. Of course this wasn't just about physical exposure. It was a supernatural test, designed specifically to reveal exactly what Selina was. She was going to be exposed in every possible way. And there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop it. The great hall blazed with 1,000 candles as every wolf in the Northern Territory gathered to witness the ritual that would either crown Selina as Luna or condemn her to death. Alpha King Gomez sat on his throne of blackened oak and wolf skulls, golden eyes fixed on the entrance where Selina would appear, and for the first time in 2 centuries, he felt something he'd thought long dead: fear. Not fear of the ritual itself. Not fear of what the pack might think. Fear of what he suspected he would find beneath Selina's carefully maintained composure. He'd done his research after their first meeting. Sent Marcus to investigate the Eastern Pack's history, to dig through records that most wolves had forgotten existed. What his beta had found had been troubling. 23 years ago, Alpha Cyrus had taken a mate named Morgana. A witch. Their union had been controversial but legal, unusual, but not forbidden. Then Morgana had died under suspicious circumstances. Officially, it was illness. But the timing was convenient. Right after Selina's 8th birthday. Right after the age when half-blood marks typically manifested fully. If Selina carried witch blood, if she bore the crescent mark that identified half-bloods, pack law was unambiguous. She would have to die. And Gomez would be the one expected to kill her. The massive doors at the far end of the hall swung open, and the assembled pack fell silent. Every eye turned toward the entrance. Selina appeared, and despite everything, despite his suspicions, despite the political calculations, despite 2 centuries of carefully maintained emotional distance, Gomez felt his breath catch. She wore the traditional Luna ceremonial robes, white silk so pure it seemed to glow in the candlelight, embroidered with silver thread and patterns that mimicked wolf fur and moonlight. The garment covered her from neck to floor, heavy and ornate, hiding everything. For now, she walked slowly down the long aisle toward his throne, and Gomez could see the tremor in her hands, the way she kept her spine rigidly straight, as if that alone could hold her together. Elder Mara walked beside her, chanting in the old tongue words of blessing and binding that had been spoken at every Luna ceremony for 1,000 years. Behind them, the 3 handmaidens carried ceremonial items: a silver chalice, a bundle of herbs, a blade for the blood oath. The crowd parted as Selina approached, wolves on either side watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to judgment to barely concealed hostility. Many of them had lost family members in the 60-year war with the Eastern Pack. This marriage was supposed to end that bloodshed, but peace treaties were fragile things, and trust was even more fragile. Gomez studied Selina's face as she drew closer. She'd been beautiful at their first meeting, but tonight she was something else entirely. Her dark hair was braided in intricate patterns, silver threads woven through like moonlight caught in a storm. Her skin was luminous from the ceremonial oils. Her green eyes, unusual for a wolf, another detail that had caught his attention, were bright with barely suppressed emotion. Fear. He could smell it on her, sharp and acrid beneath the scent of sacred herbs. But there was something else too. Something that surprised him. Defiance. She reached the base of his throne and sank gracefully to her knees, the white robes pooling around her like water. Her head bowed as tradition demanded, exposing the nape of her neck in a gesture of submission. But her hands, folded in her lap, were clenched into fists. Elder Mara stepped forward and raised her arms. The hall fell into complete silence, no rustling, no whispers, nothing but the crackling of candles and the distant howl of wind outside the great stone walls. "We gather under the full moon to witness the binding of Alpha and Luna," Mara intoned, her voice carrying to every corner of the massive space. "We gather to test worthiness, to reveal truth, to ensure the bloodline remains pure and strong." Gomez kept his eyes on Selina. She hadn't looked up, hadn't met his gaze. Was she afraid of what he'd see in her eyes? Or afraid of what she'd see in his? "The union of Alpha King Gomez and Selina of the Eastern Pack will bring peace to territories long divided by war," Mara continued. "But peace built on lies is no peace at all. Peace built on weakness will crumble. The bearing of truth ensures that our new Luna comes to us without deception, without corruption, without shame." At the word corruption, Selina's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. Gomez saw it. He wondered how many others did. "Alpha King Gomez," Mara turned to face him. "Do you accept this woman as your mate, your Luna, your equal in all things pertaining to the governance of the Northern Pack?" The formal words of the ceremony. Gomez had spoken them before, 3 times over 2 centuries. Each time had been political. Each time, he'd felt nothing but cold duty. This time was supposed to be the same. He stood, descending the 3 steps from his throne to stand before Selina's kneeling form. Even kneeling, she barely came up to his chest. So young, so small, so fragile compared to the weight of centuries he carried. "I accept her," he said, his voice carrying easily through the hall. "Pending the completion of the ritual." Pending. The word hung in the air like a threat. Mara nodded and turned back to Selina. "Selina of the Eastern Pack, do you accept Alpha King Gomez as your mate, your alpha, your sovereign in all things?" Selina's voice, when it came, was steady despite the fear Gomez could smell rolling off her in waves. "I accept him." "Then we proceed to the sacred vows." Mara gestured, and the handmaidens stepped forward with the ceremonial items. What followed was ancient ritual, performed exactly as it had been for generations. Selina and Gomez each drank from the silver chalice, wine mixed with wolf's blood, bitter and metallic. They each spoke the vows in the old tongue, words that bound them not just legally but magically, supernaturally, in ways that went deeper than any human marriage ever could. "Do you swear to lead with strength?" Mara asked Selina. "I swear." Selina's voice didn't waver. "Do you swear to bear his heirs?" A pause, so brief most wouldn't notice. "I swear." "Do you swear to die before betraying this pack?" Another pause. This one longer. Selina's eyes finally lifted, meeting Gomez's gaze directly for the first time since entering the hall. In her green eyes, he saw a question. A plea, perhaps. Or maybe a warning. "I swear," she said, and Gomez knew with absolute certainty that she was lying. Not about the vow itself, but about what she was. The ceremony continued. The blade was presented. Selina cut her palm, then Gomez cut his. They clasped hands, blood mingling, while Mara bound their wrists together with silver cord and chanted blessings in the old tongue. Through it all, Gomez felt the supernatural weight of the vows settling over them like chains. This wasn't just theater. The magic in werewolf bonding ceremonies was real, binding them together in ways that would make it physically painful to be separated, that would let them sense each other's emotions across distances, that would tie their life forces together in subtle, but undeniable ways. If he'd completed the ceremony, truly completed it, all the way through, breaking the bond would require either mutual consent or death. But the ceremony wasn't complete. Not yet. Mara unwound the silver cord from their wrists and stepped back. The crowd leaned forward in anticipation. "We come now," Mara announced, her ancient voice ringing through the hall, "to the final test. The bearing of truth." The atmosphere in the hall shifted, became charged with something primal. Wolves in the crowd began to shift partially, eyes glowing gold or silver, claws extending slightly, the air filling with the scent of pack magic awakening. Outside, through the high windows, Gomez could see the full moon rising above the mountains. Its light began to stream through the windows, pale silver beams that cut through the candlelight like blades. "The bearing reveals more than flesh," Mara said, each word deliberate. "It reveals truth. Only the worthy survive it." She turned to Gomez. "Alpha King, you will remove the ceremonial robe. The pack will witness. The moon will judge." This was tradition. The Alpha himself had to disrobe his new Luna, demonstrating both his claim and his willingness to expose her before his pack. It was intimate and brutal in equal measure, a display of dominance that dated back to times when Alphas had to prove their mates were strong enough to bear the weight of leadership. Gomez stepped closer to Selina. She'd risen to her feet during the vows, and now stood before him in the white robes that hid everything. Her hands were trembling again. Badly. He could hear her heart hammering, could smell the spike of pure terror in her scent. "Look at me," he said quietly, too low for anyone else to hear. Selina's eyes met his, and in them he saw something that made his own dead heart ache, resignation. She knew what was about to happen. She knew what the moonlight would reveal. And she was going to face it anyway. "Whatever I see," Gomez whispered, moving close enough that his words were for her alone. "Don't run. Trust me." Her eyes widened slightly. Confusion flickered across her face. Before she could respond, before he could second-guess the instinct that had made him offer protection to someone he barely knew, Gomez's hands moved to the ties of her ceremonial robe. The hall fell silent. Even the candles seemed to still their flickering. His fingers worked the intricate knots. There were 7 of them, each tied in a specific pattern that had symbolic meaning he'd long since forgotten. Slowly, deliberately, he loosened each one. Selina's breathing was shallow, rapid. She was on the verge of panic. "Breathe," he murmured. Slowly. She obeyed, though he could see the effort it took. The last knot came free. The robe was held now only by gravity and Selina's rigid posture. Gomez looked into her eyes one more time. Saw fear. Saw courage. Saw something else he couldn't quite name. Then he pulled the robe from her shoulders. It fell in a whisper of silk, pooling at her waist, and the collective gasp that rose from the assembled pack was like a physical force. Selina stood before them, exposed from the waist up, her skin luminous in the mingled light of candles and rising moon. And where Gomez had expected to see the silver crescent mark of a half-blood blazing on her left ribs, there was nothing. Smooth, unmarked skin. Perfect. Pure. The pack erupted in approving howls, the sound building until it shook the rafters of the ancient hall. But Gomez, standing close enough to see the fine tremor that ran through Selina's entire body, close enough to smell the sharp metallic tang of magic being actively maintained, knew the truth. The mark was there. She was simply hiding it with a glamour so powerful it could withstand even the full moon's revealing light. The question was, how long could she maintain it? And what would he do when it inevitably failed? The robe pulled at Selina's waist, and in the candlelit great hall, every eye fixed on her exposed skin, smooth, unmarked, perfect. Too perfect. Because where the silver crescent mark should be burning bright under the full moon's gaze, there was nothing. Maya's glamour spell had held. But Selina knew better than to feel relief. Magic this strong always demanded a price. The pack erupted in approving howls. The Luna appeared pure, worthy. Elder Mara circled Selina slowly, examining her skin with ancient, knowing eyes. Those gray eyes lingered too long on her left ribs, where the glamour shimmered almost imperceptibly. Selina struggled to maintain composure, to not show the pain as the mark burned beneath the illusion like a brand pressed to bare flesh. Each second felt like an eternity. Each breath was agony. Gomez noticed her subtle wince and stepped closer, positioning his larger frame between her and the crowd's hungry stares. "She is worthy," he announced, his voice carrying absolute authority. "The ritual is..." He didn't finish. Maya collapsed. The young handmaiden hit the stone floor hard, convulsing, blood streaming from her nose and ears. The glamour spell was too powerful, maintained for too long. It was consuming her life force with each passing second. Chaos erupted. Handmaidens rushed to Maya's aid. Wolves shifted partially in confusion and alarm. And in the distraction, Selina felt the glamour shatter completely. The silver crescent mark blazed to life on her left ribs, glowing bright enough to cast shadows across Gomez's stunned face. They locked Selina in the Luna's chambers, the very rooms that should have been her sanctuary, while the Council of Elders convened to decide her fate. Through the thick oak door, she could hear them arguing about the 1,000 ways she should die. But what terrified her more was the silence from Gomez, who stood trial alongside her for the unforgivable crime of protecting a half-blood. Selina paced the luxurious prison, still wearing Gomez's cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The silver mark on her ribs pulsed with each heartbeat, no longer hidden, no longer deniable. She was what she was, and now everyone knew. The door opened suddenly. Guards brought Maya in, barely conscious, her face deathly pale. They deposited her on the velvet couch and left without a word. Maya. Selina rushed to her side, kneeling beside the young woman who'd sacrificed so much. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for you to." "Worth it," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. "Someone had to try." Selina placed her hands on Maya's temples, letting the witch magic flow through her fingertips. Small healing spells her mother had taught her years ago. No point in hiding what she was anymore. The warmth spread from her palms, knitting torn blood vessels, soothing the magical backlash that had nearly killed Maya. Through the walls, fragments of the council meeting drifted to them. 200 years of law cannot be broken for one woman. The Alpha King has been compromised by her witchcraft. Execute them both and restore order. Selina's hands stilled. Them both. They were going to kill Gomez too. "This is my fault," she whispered. "He tried to protect me, and now." He knew. Maya's eyes opened, clearer now that the healing magic was working. "Before the ritual, he knew what you were." "That's impossible." "How could he?" "I saw his face when the mark appeared." He wasn't surprised, Selina. He was prepared. Before Selina could process this, the shouting beyond the door reached a crescendo. Then, abruptly, silence. Footsteps approached. Heavy. Measured. Alone. The door opened and Gomez entered. His formal ceremonial clothes were gone, replaced by simple dark clothing. Blood still stained his collar from where Selina's mark had been revealed. She'd scratched him in her panic when the glamour failed, her nails drawing crimson lines across his throat. He looked exhausted. Ancient. Like the weight of 2 centuries had finally caught up with him all at once. "How is she?" he asked, nodding toward Maya. "Recovering." The spell nearly killed her. Selina stood, facing him. "They're going to execute us." "Yes." The simple acknowledgement hit harder than any rage would have. No denials. No false comfort. "I'm sorry," Selina said. "You shouldn't have protected me." "You should have." "Should have what?" "Let them tear you apart in the Great Hall." Gomez moved to the window, staring out at the moon that had exposed everything. "I've spent 2 centuries building this kingdom. Won wars. Expanded territories. Brought prosperity." He turned to face her. "And in all that time, I never once questioned whether the old laws were right. I simply enforced them. The Halfblood law was created in fear. 300 years ago, during the Witch Wars, when our people were nearly destroyed by magical attacks. Halfbloods were seen as spies, traitors, weapons used against us." His golden eyes met hers. "But that was 300 years ago. The world has changed. We've changed. Everything except our fear." Selina stared at him. "You knew. Before the ritual." Maya was right. "I suspected." Gomez crossed to her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "Your mother was Morgana the Wise, executed for witchcraft when you were 8 years old. The timing of her death, right after your 8th birthday, the age when half-blood marks manifest. Your father's desperate need for this alliance, trading his only daughter to end a war. Your fear when I mentioned the ritual." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and traced the edge of his cloak where it covered her mark. "The pieces were all there. Then why go through with the ceremony? Why not just kill me before?" "Because I wanted to see if you'd run." His voice dropped lower. "If you'd sacrifice your brother, your people, your honor to save yourself. You didn't. You stood before my entire pack, knowing you'd be exposed, knowing you'd die, and you did it anyway." Something flickered in his ancient eyes. "That's not corruption, Selina. That's courage. The council won't see it that way. No, they won't. He stepped back, his expression hardening. They've given me 3 choices. Execute you myself and retain my throne. Exile you and accept reduced authority. Or face trial by combat. If I win, you live but can never be Luna. If I lose, we both die. Then choose exile for me, Selina said immediately. You keep your kingdom, I disappear, everyone. I'm choosing trial by combat. The words hit her like a physical blow. No, Gomez, you can't, you barely know me. I'm not worth. Let me decide what you're worth. He moved toward the door, then paused. The trial is tomorrow at moonrise. The council has chosen their champion. Who? Gomez's joy tightened. My son, Riker. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a sound like a death knell. Selina stood frozen, her mind reeling. Son. Gomez had a son, and that son would be trying to kill him in less than 24 hours. Because of her. Because she'd been too desperate to refuse this marriage, too cowardly to confess the truth, too selfish to sacrifice herself before dragging others down with her. Maya's hand touched her arm. He chose this, Selina. He knew what it would cost, and he chose it anyway. Why? Selina's voice broke. Why would he risk everything for someone he barely knows? Maya smiled sadly. Maybe because someone barely knowing you and still choosing to protect you is the definition of honor. Or maybe... She glanced toward the door where Gomez had disappeared. Maybe because 2 centuries of being the Cold King left him hungry for something real. Something worth protecting that isn't territory or power or political alliances. That's ridiculous. We've barely spoken 10 words to each other. Sometimes 10 words is enough. Maya settled back against the couch, her strength returning slowly. My grandmother used to say that wolves know their mates instantly. One look, one scent, one moment, and they know. The bond forms whether they want it to or not. We're not mates. This was arranged. Political. Was it? Maya's knowing look made Selina turn away. Because the truth was, when Gomez had whispered, "Trust me," before removing her robe, when he'd positioned himself between her and the mob's fury, when he'd wrapped her in his cloak and declared her under his protection, something had shifted in her chest. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. And hope, in a situation like this, was the cruelest thing of all. Outside, the moon climbed higher, indifferent to the chaos it had helped unleash. Tomorrow it would rise again, and under its light, an Alpha King would fight his own son. For a half-blood he barely knew. For a law he no longer believed in. For a future that neither of them might survive to see. Selina touched the mark on her ribs, no longer hidden, no longer shameful. Just part of who she was. If Gomez died tomorrow, she'd make sure his sacrifice meant something. She'd find a way to change the laws he'd challenged, to protect the other half-bloods hiding in terror across every territory. And if they both somehow survived? Well, that was a future too dangerous to imagine. But as she lay down in the Luna's chambers that should have been hers, wrapped in the cloak that smelled of pine and wolf and something uniquely Gomez, Selina couldn't help but imagine it anyway.